It is showtime, folks. I hope this mic is working.
Larry Elder is being the antithesis of that type of Republican.
Testing. Testing. Yeah, okay, that works. Awesome. All right. We're live, folks. Live. Yay. From Washington, D.C. We have 3 kids here who are from California, so this strikes close to home. But it's later here than normally would be, unfortunately. But we welcome any and all questions from you folks. We have 3 knowledgeable politics students to answer your questions. I'm doing well. Thank you, Connor. Feel free to hop on in whenever. Say hi. Folks, this is Tristan.
Hello.
He's an expert on all things California recall.
I'm Governor Newsom's top advisor.
He's not, but...
I'm his second top advisor.
All right, let's start answering questions. I think we can do it like this, right? Awesome. If there is enough turnout, he can be recalled, right? Well, no, it's the opposite. If there is enough turnout, he would not be recalled. The issue for Democrats is that if there isn't enough turnout, then he can be recalled. They're banking on turnout, hence why they've invited so many top Democrats. As you can see in the background, there's Van Jones.
No, of course not, John. Never.
No, John, it is not.
Me and Ryan do it every night.
If you guys super chat, you will be featured on here. There's that, and also it'll be easier for me to answer any and all of your questions. Recent exit polls have put the recall at 15%, and the vaccine mandate is getting positive reviews, which is why I have it put it at that margin. I think 15 to 16% is pretty accurate. In all likelihood, Newsom will receive anywhere from 55 to 60%. If it's anywhere in that territory, it'll go as expected. Anything lower, bad news for him. Anything higher, good news for him. I think Democrats should aim for anything above 60%.
What if
Newsom should reach about 65 to 73%? I think that's extremely unrealistic, given that in a Democratic wave election year in 2018, he only received 61%. He
didn't go to French Laundry during that year.
It's true. He did not go to French Laundry during that year. There's 9 million early votes who are mostly Democrats. Newsom won't be recalled. That brings me to my little segue here. The early vote that's going to come in right at 11 p.m. Eastern time, 8 p.m. Pacific time when the polls close, is heavily going to favor Newsom. You should prepare for that. It's going to be probably 65-35, maybe even 70-30. That said, once the in-person today vote comes in, it'll narrow, just like it did on election night in November. That does not mean there was any fraud going on.
How do you know?
How are top Democrats able to reverse California's view of Newsom in such a short time frame? Do you mean that from a negative outlook to a more positive one? In that way, I think it's less to do with Newsom and more to do with his opponent, Larry Elder. I think they did a fabulous job of painting the election as Newsom versus Elder, not Newsom versus no Newsom, which is what it started as.
Stopping the Republican recall.
Yes. And specifically targeting Larry Elder. And that actually, the best idea that the Newsom campaign had was to not put up a replacement Democratic candidate, because that allowed them to pick out Elder, point out his more conservative stances that don't necessarily align with California's politics. Assuming Larry Elder ranks first out of the replacement candidates, who do you think will rank second? According to the polls, it would be Kevin Paffrath, the Democrat YouTuber. Shout out YouTube. But I mean, I think there's a good chance that Kevin Faulconer outperforms polling because he's sort of been painted as the most moderate candidate with a chance to win, at least among Democrats who, didn't vote no or skip the second question and would rather talk about or vote for a more moderate Republican in the off chance that Newsom does get recalled. So it could be that he outperforms. Again, 10 minutes until polls close, folks.
So stressful.
Where do I think Caitlyn Jenner will land? It's a good question. That'll be interesting to see. Does she top 1%? Does she top 2%? Does she go on and win it all? She won't, but how much is Biden's presidency affecting the race? I don't think it's affecting the race that much because from a Republican standpoint, this race didn't become national. It was very local, focused on Newsom and what he did wrong from their perspective. I think the Democrats did more nationalizing of the race, sort of painting it as a Trumpist effort and something that they needed to put a stop to, not just to stop the Republican recall, but to stop Trumpism itself.
Concerned about losing muscle strength? Fight back with Rejuvenate. Maximize your workout with Rejuvenate.
There was news that Newsom might not be put on the ballot as a Democrat 1 or 2 months before the recall. Do you know if this is true? I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to.
He lost it for, I don't know too much about it, but he lost it for years.
Okay.
So he wasn't able to, he had to be independent on the ballot.
Best agents know how to market your home for top dollar.
Everyone knows they're really the recall. Gavin Newsom.
You want to have the best agents, but you want to get the best deals. Using Untitled Agent to build properties that save over $30,000. Our service is free, available nationwide, and there's zero obligation. Call us today or visit untitled.com.
Is your credit score getting in the way of the things you want to do?
This is the new
Network offer fast and flexible lending. Borrow up to $10,000 and choose repayment terms that work for you. You may even be able to build your credit history as you repay. Net credit, a more personal loan.
Was this a write-in vote? How old do you have to be governor of California? What's the actual law on that?
Probably just 18.
Sorry, guys. I am currently inviting somebody to join.
His girlfriend.
Did you know sleep helps support you?
Nice.
Alvarado. The clock is ticking.
Also, California is notorious for letting that kind of dogs.
Do you want to pull up a chair?
Is that a vote? It's in the kitchen.
And if he goes, who will replace him? The outcome will have a major impact on the state.
I think this is a problematic take to have. There's no evidence that fraud has occurred. I don't think you should go into any election assuming that there will be fraud. It seems like a self-fulfilling prophecy to me. Newsom will get 40 to 50%. That would be problematic for Democrats, not just in California, but in 2022 as well. I think one thing that hasn't really been stressed enough is that if Newsom does survive this recall, his reelection in 2022 is basically guaranteed. Like what we saw in Wisconsin with Scott Walker, I think 2012 or whatever, the recall against him propped up his local popularity, and he cruised to reelection.
First debate arrested in Los Angeles made one hearing from the Newsom camp about their grounding.
Another interesting thing is that if Newsom does get recalled, that is, if he receives less than 50% or the keep vote is less than 50%, Larry Elder would be likely to win with less than 30% of the vote. He would be the first gubernatorial candidate to win and take office having received less than 30% of the vote in American history, which could instigate a lot of reform with this California recall process. And if it weren't for the election being next November, I think it would be very likely that if Larry Elder did assume office, that Democrats would just start a recall process once again very quickly.
And John, how are local officials preparing to keep the votes secure as they count the ballots?
Yeah, Jake, despite this barrage of conspiracy theories.
I mean, this was, I'm not going to say anything. LT is not coming on. He's currently studying. He's being a good student. I invited him, but it's okay. It's okay. You think California recall reform is likely no matter what the results are tonight? I would agree. I would absolutely agree. I don't think anybody on the Democratic side or Republican side thinks this is a very fair process at the moment. Given the fact that I think around 1.5 million signatures. Actually, I don't want to be wrong about that. How many signatures did they collect?
About 1.5.
Well, about 1.5 million represents what, like 10% of the entire electorate? I don't think that should be enough to trigger yeah. Well, there's 22 million registered voters in California. So it could be even less than that. I'm just not very confident in the idea that that tiny proportion of an electorate can instigate this sort of extremely expensive process.
How many did they just say? 800,000.
800,000 pre-election votes in Orange County. If a Republican wins, do you think that they can win the Senate and House in 2022? Because if Republicans can win in California, they can win anywhere. I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think it's universal. I think the circumstances surrounding this campaign and this race are completely different than a midterm election. This is very focused on the state of California. Of course, if Newsom were to be recalled, it would cause a lot of I guess you could say backlash against the Democratic Party, or oh shoot, there we go. Hi.
Hey, can you hear me?
Really forgot to add him. My apologies, guys. This is unbiased election predictions. I don't know if you heard of him. He joined me on our November election night.
Can you guys hear me?
Is he biased?
He is not. He is unbiased,
He's unbiased
in his election predictions.
Agreed.
I also think to the person that asked the question about whether or not if a Republican can win in California, then a Republican could win anywhere. This isn't a referendum necessarily on the Democratic Party or Joe Biden, maybe not even Newsom. It's a referendum on this recall effort started primarily with a mask mandate and a COVID mandate, and then just COVID-19, not a COVID mandate. So this is what we're seeing, and this is not, the attitude isn't just in California, but the recall is just in California. So I think also when you're looking at what I think is 14 months until next November,
Right.
COVID is probably not going to be a deciding factor or a top issue to most voters. So what we're seeing today is probably the last time we're going to be seeing COVID on a ballot.
This is true. Especially because COVID was the top issue in the exit poll, right? Which hypothetically would be good news for the yes on recall campaign, but I'm not sure if that would be enough.
But did you guys notice that right now, I think that whites are making up about 5% more of the electorate in California than they did in 2020 in November?
Ryan, the unbiased.
I'm not sure. He's
He said in the
muted
chat.
at the moment.
Can you guys?
I think you're muted at the moment.
Hey,
There
can
you
hear me
go.
right now? It says
Hello
I'm
there.
muted right now.
I
You're
think
exactly 1 minute away.
your mic is still a little bit quiet.
Or yes, to have any chance. You see the red on this map? These are the counties that voted Republican back in the 2018 race for governor. Republicans have to turn out in overwhelming numbers here, especially in the more populous places like Riverside County down here. Then Republicans have to have a rebound. The yes forces have to have a rebound in places like Orange County. The numbers have to be.
How long until we know who the California governor is? This is an important question. At about 11 p.m., which is right now, we should start to get a wave of results from the early voting. in the mail-in voting. The election day vote should the election day vote should come in or it should be tabulated as we proceed tonight and should be counted up until the early hours of tomorrow morning. If the race is tight, we probably won't know the answer of who exactly becomes the next governor of California and is not sworn in until October 22nd. Until later this week, because all of the ballots that were sent in the last 1 or 2 days, but were postmarked before election day and can be counted up until, I believe, 5 days after the election. So if the election is close, we will not know for a while.
But we're gonna find out tonight, for being honest.
In all likelihood, we will know tonight. Do you want to turn up the?
I want to hear when James Carville says we're gonna know that.
Just put
That's all
the volume on my computer.
And we asked folks, what do you think about the current COVID situation in California? The plurality here, 39% of voters in this election say it's getting better, 31% staying the same, only a quarter say that it's getting worse. And I want to
Those are probably Democrats.
that getting
Democrats
better
too.
contingent. Those 39%, how do they split on the recall?
Where's the-
Look at this. 64% of them say no. Keep Gavin Newsom in office. Only 36% say yes to the recall, but in the
Really,
private
you'll
government,
see.
he's winning
I don't know if I'll
the
see.
biggest
Send that.
slice of
Someone
foreign
said,
voters
I don't know
that
if I'll
say,
see
hey,
you back.
we think things are getting better here. We
Definitely
also
take.
looked at a couple key demographics that are making up why.
How's
he's
college
leading
treating
in
Ryan so
this
far?
race right now.
It's going really well. Thank you for asking.
58% say
I don't
no
want to
the
talk
recall.
over
Keep
our guy
Gavin
over here.
Newsom.
Can you guys hear?
Say yes to the recall. Now, that's a narrower margin of victory with
Please let me know if you can hear
Latinos
CNN in the
in
background.
the 2018 governor's race. But it's still a category he's winning by 16 percentage points, and Latinos have grown their share of the electorate by 6 percentage points since just 3 years ago. So that is
Still no
benefiting
results.
Newsom. And of course, we know female voters have been
I'm checking
critical
New York
to
Times.
Try turning it
Newsom's
up.
strategy, and
Try
you
turning
see
the
here,
speaker up.
among female voters, 62% say no to the recall.
You can just bring it over.
62% of female voters say no to the recall.
Say yes.
All right, David Talley, thanks so much. And David,
Most of these exit polls, I assume, are
Yeah,
in-person election day votes. So obviously, given COVID era voting, you can't trust exit polls as much as you have been able to in the past. That's what we saw in 2020.
In the Newsom camp and more broadly among Democratic strategists, that it is going to be decisive at the end of the day. It's going to potentially be a while until we get the total vote, but that is really critical for them. In the idea of making the point.
Can you guys hear me now?
that they want
We
to
can.
make is that.
Hola, amigo.
I'm sorry about that.
Welcome in. No, you're totally fine.
They are
You're totally
trying to
fine.
take this point.
All right, so I think you guys might have briefly addressed this, but for me, what's most interesting from what I'm seeing from the exit polls right now is that it looks like white voters are making up 5% more of the electorate than they did in November.
hmm
Serve you well.
So I'm guessing I mean, I guess generally speaking, that would benefit Republicans, but I'm guessing that voters especially white voters that turn out for special elections or recalls more in the suburbs and more likely to be educated. So I'm not sure who that would really favor at this point. Like, I'd have to see what Orange County is doing. You know?
I mean, I think it's important to note that, I mean, like a 5-point difference in exit polls in COVID era politics is kind of, wishy-washy in the sense that you can't necessarily say with any conviction that there's a big swing there or any kind of thing that we can really analyze and sort of learn from, because with sort of the difference in election day voting, mail-in voting, so we'll see. I mean,
that's a good sign for you.
Absolutely, and
yeah,
the exit polls and the runoffs weren't great either. So
right. And I think
we have our first votes in from NYT.
we do. No votes from what county? Santa Clara.
From Napa. They have Newsom at 71 point, no at 71.6, yes at 28.4.
Which website are you looking at the moment?
I'm looking at New York Times.
Okay, I'm looking at Decision Desk. So I have results in from Santa Clara County. So
Oh yeah,
area,
as well. Oh wow, that's a lot.
78%. I mean, that's as expected. Santa Clara County is extremely Democratic.
It looks like it's super early, but Newsom is running a little bit ahead of Biden in Santa Clara. If I recall correctly, he went up by like I think 71 or 72% of the vote.
Right.
71.
But then again, yeah, these are mail-in votes, which will heavily favor Democrats.
Absolutely, but
You're right. You're right.
do we know what percentage of votes were cast? Or no, I guess because it's by, but do we know what percentage of votes were turned in on September 14th? Because it is kind of
On September 14th,
Yeah.
I have not seen the numbers on that.
All right. I think NYT will have it by the end of the night, but I'm not sure.
I'll pull up NYT.
So 60% so far, 61% if you round up, say, no, keep Gavin Newsom. We do not want to recall him.
This is a mistake to do the CNN one.
San Diego.
The first numbers we're going to see tonight.
So according to hold on.
These are mail-in.
I don't know who this is from, but someone's saying that early votes in San Diego are 60-40 in favor of Newsom.
Yeah, that's on CNN right now.
All right. Yeah, I have Decision Desk in New York Times. I don't have CNN right now, but
Yeah,
I think
I'm going to.
That's
1 second.
San Diego, the suburbs around it have been trending Democratic. This is the governor's race in 2018. Forget the numbers, just look at the margin, 57%. So if Democrats
There we go, now I
putting down
can-
Newsom and voting no tonight.
Actually, you know what?
roughly, switch to this map here,
I'm
roughly
going to
in
stick
excess of
with-
that percentage, that tells you the Democrats are holding on. So
I don't know. New York Times or Decision Desk? That is a question.
Decision Desk is usually faster, but
Usually,
they're a little more consistent.
I thought they were better in November.
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't really. I was just using CNN and Politico because I didn't have.
Yeah. It is a little bit odd how all of these sites have like a different county.
Yeah, I don't know where they're getting.
It's odd.
It looks like Decision Desk has because
Yeah,
Santa Clara turnouts at like 400,000 or 447,000, and that seems that seems a little weird. Like because that's like a third of they're projecting what 700,000 votes or 700,000 votes, something like that, to be cast when it looks like
Right.
there were 900,000 cast in 2020.
Very early.
Like that's
Right.
I was expecting a little less.
Does have a history of electing Republicans to the governor, to the mayor's office. And I believe that.
Oh, they have Ventura now.
Yeah, we have Ventura 64-35 in favor of no. Or 64-36. My apologies. Got San Diego and New York Times 60.6, 39.4.
They used to be Republicans. So to your point, that's
Is
exactly.
Decision Desk only reporting early votes right now, and is New York Times doing something different?
I don't think so. I think they're both early votes. They're just delayed unevenly. So we've got Larry Elder, as expected, leading in the Who Shall Succeed Gavin Newsom, if he is recalled. Kevin Pathrath sitting in third. We've just got a new update. What was that? I assume there must have been more out of San Diego. Kevin Faulkner coming in close behind. Those are good numbers for Larry Elder. 45.66%. Those are extremely good numbers for Larry Elder.
Oh yeah, I see that. The New York Times has him at 39.
Again, the second question is very, very unlikely to matter, but it's still interesting to look at nonetheless.
I'm curious if Kevin Faulkner wins San Diego County. That's what I'm watching.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. He's not. Larry Elder has 55% out of San Diego with 44%, and Faulkner only at 22%. That is a little bit surprising.
Or is that at NYT or at a Decision
That is
Desk?
Decision Desk.
Decision Desk.
He was a two-term mayor, correct?
Yes. Although it was weird because he first won in a special election. Because the mayor
Right,
was
right. But he was reelected.
popular.
Yeah.
Keep Newsom in office. No to the recall by a big
Oh,
margin.
wow.
If those stay blue, game over. So Orange County, because I think probably some of our viewers are aware that Orange County historically has been a Republican stronghold, although it has.
Merced is what I'm most of the counties that are reported. Obviously, San Diego is most interesting, but Merced could be interesting to see where or kind of rural Hispanics could be at, because I think they're going to decline in turnout, but I still want to see if Newsom does worse than Biden with Hispanics in California, because Biden still did pretty well with Hispanics in California.
Yeah, again, and here's the third part, right? So Los Angeles is the largest county. So then you go to San Diego, and then you come to Orange. If there is going to be a no, and you're absolutely right, as I said earlier, you need every Republican, and then you need Democrats and independents, enough of them who voted for Newsom, either to vote yes or enough of them to stay home so that those recall votes rack up, if you will. If the margin is like that, it's just not going to happen. There's just no way.
You don't have to sing the song, it would take you to Ventura County.
I'm going to take you right out here to Ventura County.
Because I was told we were getting some votes.
And again, there it is, right there. Everything that Newsom needs to come in blue, meaning Newsom needs to come in no. So far,
Elections Daily just called the race for Newsom.
Pretty lopsided margin. Now,
That's fast.
County,
Business
Florida,
Insider.
I don't know what I want to do with this, but
just go back and look at the margin again.
nothing
I officially
dramatic going on here.
And then you get no.
For Trinity's basically, Trinity with 84% in on NYT, the first county that's going to vote to recall Newsom.
Right now, because the main dynamic for us going
Newsom is currently trailing Trinity by 9. It was a county that Trump won by about 5.
down here around San Jose as well. Let's look at the one where we have our first yes. Our first of California's 58 counties, where at least the early votes are coming in yes. But again, this is the 48 of the 48 counties.
Tulare County and Glenn County.
Just to be read, just in terms of the raw math, it doesn't do much for you, because if you pull out and look at the raw math,
Correlation.
here you are.
John, let me interrupt for 1 second. I want to go to Nick Walk right now. Los Angeles. Nick, what do you see?
That's weird.
Hey, Jake, well, we just
think
got
there's
the results of the mail-in ballots here in Los Angeles County, and no.
So it looks like it's super early, but in some of these rural northern counties like Glenn and Trinity, there are shifts towards the Republic or against Newsom, but it's not anywhere close to enough to what they would need to win the race.
A big margin for Newsom. Now, back in 2018, when Newsom won the governorship, he got 72% in Los Angeles. He has got 76% of mail-in ballots so far here in LA saying Newsom should remain as governor. Now, this is, of course, the most populous county in the country, and also in California.
Los Angeles mail-in vote broke for Newsom by 44%. 54%, excuse me.
Where are you seeing that?
I'm just seeing it on CNN. It says that Newsom won mail-in 76 to 23.
Okay.
Yes, I can. So no is 1,414,354. Yes is 438,810. That is what we have so far from those mail-in ballots. Of course, the ballot boxes are going to start coming into this.
Okay, here's a random graphic I just saw. Aside from whites, Asians are the only demographic that have voted as a percentage more in the recall than in 2020.
Huh. Very interesting.
This is the most
Yeah,
populous
I mean,
county
I'm
in all
assuming it's mostly Asian voters in the suburbs.
And you
Which,
say the votes
Right.
to Governor Newsom are, give it again, the raw total?
ooh, Fresno's, that's
Okay,
weird.
so the raw total, 76% say they want to keep Newsom. That is 1,414,354.
Yeah, 76% in
To-
LA County.
Get rid of Newsom.
Yeah.
23.6%. That's 438,810. That is from the mail-in ballots so far, which were about a third of all the registered voters here in Los Angeles County. So that's a big chunk. But listen, more than half of the registered voters in LA County are Democrats. Normally in the last couple of election cycles, we've seen the Democrats perform in LA about 10 points above where they are in the rest of the state. As I say, Newsom got 72% in LA County when he won the election last time.
Any new questions?
He got 76%.
Any new
now
questions?
saying that they want him to stay.
All right, then, thanks so much. And John, I mean, that's almost a 1 million
You can scroll
vote
through.
deficit.
San Mateo looks bad. For,
This is giving me November PTSD. The live counting from the like where they collect the votes and then
No,
they report it off their
Cover
phone.
County.
These are not-
My gosh.
This is why it's important to have
You
a-
just listen to
Those were the
it
days.
3 days in a row.
We're still waiting on Waukesha.
So what did I tell you? Number one, again, a word of caution. Remember back in November 2020.
It's good to see Steve King back.
Be careful. I just want everyone to be careful, especially when you have campaigns recklessly
I
saying
should write
that
it
this is
down.
a rigged system. But remember back in November, where Joe Biden was ahead in Ohio, was ahead in Texas for a while. Donald Trump was ahead in Pennsylvania for a while. We need to wait and get all of the votes. These are not all of the votes. However,
These are the early votes.
these are the earliest
Disproportionate Democrats.
Right, but we do know, yes, they're early and yes, they're disproportionate Democrats, but we do know that the Newsom campaign and even those who favor the recall would concede, this is what he needs. And this is
Let's hit
what he
100
gets.
let's hit a K,
These
guys.
numbers hold up. I'm gonna blank the numbers just so I cannot get.
This is higher than some of the election night live streams.
As you see, it's starting to fill in. I
It's
don't
the
even
California
need to go into these
expertise.
individual
It's
counties to
unique.
tell
It
you.
is.
I would have told you yesterday or a month ago.
I mean, this is shaping up as expected.
The challenge for
If you didn't
Newsom
know,
is here, especially down here. If Orange and
the
San
early
Diego
vote was always going to favor Newsom. It is more than likely to shrink and get closer to around 60-40%. The most forecasts had this race falling somewhere between 55 and 60% in favor of keeping Newsom, or otherwise, as you can see on this page, voting no on the recall. That said, anything above 60% would be very good news for Newsom and the Democratic Party in California and across the country as a whole. Anything below 55% would be a lot more worrisome.
Again, these are the early ballots, but the early ballots tell us that right
What's
now,
your margin?
everything-
My margin was 57.4, 57.3 maybe. It was something 57%, 43%, around that. But it could be closer to 15 or 16% when all is said and done.
Numbers still coming in?
Yeah, I'm
especially-
thinking it's
Right, especially if the turnout numbers are what the Democratic Party is saying they are.
yeah. I mean, like most people, Twitter is not real life, but most people have come to Dave Wasserman is kind of saying that it looks like Newsom is going to win by 15 to 20%.
Right.
It's still very much up in the air, and again, Twitter has been wrong about many things, but I'm not sure that there's a path for Republicans because, like, this is California. They never really were in a position to win, in my opinion. But
Right. I mean,
they
this was
can't-
I mean, the
it's just
circumstances.
California.
Yeah, the circumstances surrounding this election gave them the best chance they would have had in I don't know how long, and I don't know. I mean, in the future, if they're ever going to get a chance like this, but it just goes to show that California is very much blue. If anybody doubted that. Wasserman's already called it. He said, "I've seen enough. The vote to recall California Governor Gavin Newsom, Democrat, fails, and he is headed to bed. Good night." Apparently.
Called 5 minutes ago.
I mean, not surprising. Again, I think what's more important in this election is the vote total, where the margin ends up. I think more than anything, this election will serve as an indicator of where Democrats and Republicans stand on issues, or just overall their popularity, not only in California, but across the country, because as we know in these sort of polarized times, basically every local election, especially statewide elections, are inherently national.
And, just to say, I think that, like, I read an article about this, and you might have come across it too, but that one Survey USA poll from, like, the beginning of August that Newsom down 11, I think that really scared him because he thought this was going to be, he's probably not going to lose, but I think that he was guessing that he was going to cruise to victory here. And, that poll really scared him. And I think that, even if he still thought he was going to win, he really turned it up and he really started to scare a lot of Democrats in California, and the energy just shifted.
Right. And I mean, for a while there, it looked like it was very much a toss-up, at least according to 538's polling average. I'm not sure if it was ever actually competitive, but for a while there, it looked like Larry Elder certainly had a chance. And I think that sort of energized Democrats more than anything. And if anything, it caused Newsom to wake up and the Democratic Party nationally to wake up, which is why we saw Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, et cetera. But I mean, coming into this race, we knew Newsom had a giant war chest, saved up money from his last election. Yeah. I mean, it was like, I think they outspent Republicans 24-1, if according to one Republican chairman. I think more conservative estimates are like 2-1, you know. I think that's probably more accurate. But
that makes they definitely did outspend Republicans, especially on TV. Like
yeah. I mean, they dominated the airwaves. Absolutely. There were a few, you know, more conservative PACs that were fundraising for the yes on recall side of things, but they were completely flabbergasted.
They were, and I think the Republican Party, you know, and like the Democrats did this too, but specifically the Republican Party, I don't think they were ever taking this race seriously. Like even when it looked like they maybe had a shot when polling got close, they didn't even endorse the candidate. They didn't really get behind Larry Elder or, you know, anyone. So
Right.
they were kind of just sitting back and letting this unfold, and it does not look like it's going to go very well for them.
Right. Looks like we have a super chat. Red Star Undead. Hello from England. Larry Elder is a double-edged sword, and to me, it proves that the Republican Party is going down a path of nationalism and unelectability. Hope I don't speak too soon. LOL. Thank you for the super chat. Appreciate it. Again, if you guys want to be featured on the screen, feel free to super chat. Of course, you don't have to, but it does make it easier for me to see what you write and to answer any of your questions. Given how fast the chat moves and considering the fact that we are live with election results. You want to turn that up a bit?
Yeah.
6.7 million.
I wouldn't speak too soon on the unelectability, though, especially given the inherently Republican lean of the Electoral College and the House. Yes, even the House.
Larry Elder has received 1.3 million votes statewide. It's a lot. I'm interested to see where Caitlyn Jenner is sitting. 1.1%, 35,000 votes.
He's really getting. I mean, I'm surprised. I'm surprised that Caitlyn Jenner didn't get more votes based on pure name recognition, because I didn't even know who Larry Elder was until like 4 months ago.
I mean, she's behind a lot of people that I have never heard of. Yeah, which is surprising. Kevin Kiley is struggling down at 3%. I thought he would have done better. Kevin Cox is doing right around where I thought he would. Kevin Faulkner, as I thought, is vastly outperforming polls. I think most had him around John Cox, around 5 or 6%, at least the last few that I saw. But he's sitting at 11%. Again, I think that has a lot to do with the fact that he was one of the most favored candidates among Democrats that were looking to vote yes on the second question, but knew that a Democrat couldn't win. Decision Desk has projected that Gavin Newsom will be retained as governor of California. They have not necessarily changed anything about their graphic here, but again, that is as expected. The margin is what will be interesting.
Now you're looking at this map fill in, and you see a lot of blue. We're going to
This
get.
is good for Boston mayoral, but Michelle Wu and Anissa Sabi are going to be going on to the runoff. If anyone knows about that, though. It's Boston.
Providence County in the state, an overwhelming no. We want to keep our governor. 76% and counting. Again, 59%. Let's wait. We will get more votes on election day votes. The
Faulkner is still.
which will improve.
Faulkner is still only
There it is.
70% of the recall vote in San Diego.
And just to underline that point, because it's such a good point.
He's
Yeah.
like 26 in his third round.
That's unfortunate for him. I thought coming into this race, at least when he initially announced that he'd be the favorite.
Yeah, me too. And
Yeah.
there's actually talk about, like, even before the recall, it was Kevin Faulkner 2022.
Right.
This is in the middle of the state.
I think the Republicans probably would have done better to have it be Kevin Faulkner versus Gavin Newsom. I'm not sure that it would have been enough for them to win, but to have a less polarizing candidate on their side, especially if you are campaigning in a state that is as blue as California, I think that certainly would have benefited them. But, you know, ultimately what it comes down to is that the Democratic Party's efforts, specifically Newsom's efforts to paint Larry Elder as the Trump reincarnate of California, or in some cases even further to the right in California than Trump, certainly worked. And it ultimately just comes down to the fact that the partisan leaning in California is heavily Democratic. And as long as people came out to vote, which it certainly looks like they did, he was always going to be okay.
Again, we have to count the election.
Yeah, and also, I think that Newsom, like, I'm not going to defend his campaign. He clearly did not take it seriously until about a month ago, but he did a pretty good job of making it. Like, this recall should have been a referendum on Gavin Newsom. It turned into a, do you want Larry Elder to be your governor?
Yeah.
If not, don't vote for him.
Yep. If you're the Republican Party and you're going to rally around behind a candidate, why choose someone as polarizing as Larry Elder? I guess that will be a question of introspection within their party going forward. So, I mean, that said, if the margin drops down to anywhere below 55%, which honestly I would be surprised if it does at this point, I think it could be looked on more favorably by the Republican Party, and obviously the Democrats would have to do a lot more introspection in that case. But again, it doesn't look like that's going to be the case.
It also, and just something to kick around, I'm not even sure that Larry Elder was trying that hard to win. Like, he made no attempt to reach out to voters in a very liberal state. Like, he was running as a conservative Republican in a state that Joe Biden won by 29%, right? So he said he was against the minimum wage. He was very pro-life. He, didn't really address his scandal where he allegedly brandished a gun at his ex-fiance. So I'm not, like, this felt like more of a, it felt like, I don't want to say him trying to get attention, but I do think that he didn't take the campaign as seriously as, other people might have.
So now you come forward, here we go now, and you look at it here.
Folks, if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them. We have another super chat. If Larry Elder won, when would he have taken office? October 22nd. I believe I am correct in saying that, October 22nd. So that means that his reelection next year in the midterms would have been just about a year later. So his time in office would not have been long, assuming that a Democrat would have blown him out very quickly and easily.
Again, 58% here. And again, this is the fifth largest county. So we're going to go through these, right? We can go through from 1 to 10, and then we can go on to
Wait, real American cult? Oh, no.
I think this is an interesting point, and one that will probably be debated within the Republican Party going forward. Someone like Kevin Faulconer could have been more electable statewide. I'm not sure if he would have energized the Republican base in California as much. But that's the nature of politics. You give and you take.
Also adding to that, Elder might have had a chance if he stayed moderate. This is a man, and we kind of forget his background. He is so politically poisonous, and that is because he has so many years of, when we talk about, say, senators running for president, we talk about how bad it is that they might have decades of baggage and actual actual votes behind them. However, Larry Elder had every single day, he had about an hour of him speaking. It was not hard for Democratic operatives and just oppo research to dig that up and for that to go viral. So when you're looking at Larry Elder, he's never been a moderate. He never will be. And that was such an appeal to California Republicans, though it was not an appeal to independents. And that's really who he needed to target if he wanted any chance to take down Newsom.
Right. Then the other interesting thing is that this recall, I believe this specific recall attempt began before the pandemic hit, but it didn't kickstart until COVID restrictions started to anger a lot of moderate Democrats and, of course, conservative Republicans. Of course, it picked up the most steam after the French Laundry incident. But that's interesting to keep in mind. This was, I believe, the fourth or sixth time that Republicans tried to start a recall against Gavin Newsom.
Reform process.
Yeah.
I just think that, no matter who wins, it's still going to be Newsom. But I think there's going to be a lot of questions about the recall system and whether it should be reformed.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, it's a unique process, very unique to California. It's similar to the props and measures that we have on the ballot every year that sort of allow the general public to offer their opinion on specific laws and policies in California, which is also very unique. And I mean, there are pros and cons to that, just like anything. But Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
Do
Do you like the recall process?
No.
I think the idea,
Every 4 years, you
Yeah.
vote for 4 years, and then the next, after 4 years, you see what happens, there's term limits, vote again. It makes it, it's not like a fair democratic process. It's like, I don't like ballot referendum like they do in California. We're all from California. It's like voters don't really know enough, and then, it just makes everything more complicated. Like, try to simplify democracy so we have the best possible democracy or democratic republic we can have.
do you think Newsom would do well if he ran for president in 2024? I would have said yes before this whole thing. I thought he was a very promising young Democrat. I mean, he's got the sort of, he's progressive enough to appeal to a lot of that wing of the party, while also being establishment enough to appeal to the more elites of the party. I thought he had that going for him. He didn't really have any scandals on his record pre-French Laundry. He's a good-looking dude. He'd appeal to, the people who just look at his face and go, oh, I would vote for that guy. He's young. He can speak relatively well. I think he had a lot going for him. I don't know if he still will after this, but in some ways, like what happened with Scott Walker in 2012, this recall process could boost his profile, not just in California, but nationally. It could be that he cruises to re-election next year, and we see him potentially run for president in 2024, maybe later. I'm not sure exactly how old he is. Right?
Gavin Newsom,
I believe early 50s.
Yeah.
55, I think.
doesn't look like it though.
Actually, there was a time like back in, I think, like April or May, when Gavin Newsom was among the most popular governors in America. During the early days of the pandemic, he actually had a brief surge in approval rating where he was like 70%.
Right.
That was probably during the Cuomo sexual era as well.
Oh, yeah.
That is very true. I think Newsom and Cuomo were both very heavily idolized during that era. And then things just continued for too long, and the public got fed up.
It's only 53.
I'm not sure how the Latino vote is going to shape up in this election, but one thing that surprised me throughout this entire process was how the Latino vote, especially in Southern California, sort of responded very negatively to Newsom, especially over his lockdown restrictions. And we'll see how that shapes up, because for California to be competitive in the future, Republicans are going to have to make significant inroads with the Latino population. It makes up, I think, 30%? California's population? 39%. Okay. So, going forward, if Republicans want any chance in the state, I'm not saying that they will, but that would be the number one demographic to target.
The most Hispanic, as a percentage, the most Hispanic county in California is Imperial County. It doesn't have too many people, but it's over 80% Hispanic. And
Right.
2020, it was, I think, Biden plus like 35 or something.
Exit polls have 58% no, 42% yes among the Latino population. I'm not sure what the exit polls were in 2020 in California.
Biden won them by 52.
52%.
Yeah, or no, it was 75-23. He won them by 52.
Yeah, that's a big shift. I'm not sure if that's sustainable. I'm not sure how much of that has to do with COVID restrictions, because we knew coming in that Latinos were the Latinos that were anti-Newsom were mostly anti-Newsom because of COVID restrictions. So we'll see. As Ben said, in 2022, when COVID is not necessarily going to be a pressing issue on the ballot, whether that is sustainable or not remains to be seen. It's similar to the Cuban population in Miami-Dade. Whether that continues going forward, we'll see.
Also, when we're talking about the Latino vote, that is not a group that is a monolith, and they do not vote as one. This is brief, but when we are talking about Latino votes, we definitely need to start adding more nuance to those conversations.
Yeah.
So I gotta head out soon, but just to do random update, but Kevin Pafford is now in second, ahead of Kevin Faulconer.
Yeah, he was polling ahead of Faulkner for a while. I think the last time I looked at replacement candidate polling, Elder was somewhere around 30%. Paffrath was around 15%. Faulkner and Cox were around 5%. So obviously Elder is outperforming polls, but that was as expected. Faulkner is outperforming polls as I expected. I'm not sure if that was a universal thing. I have no idea who Brandon Ross is.
Me either.
I've never heard of him. I don't know who Jacqueline McGowan is. I don't know who Joel Ventresca is. I don't know who Daniel Watts is. I don't know who Holly Bate is. I know who Caitlyn Jenner is.
And Jillian got 27,000.
I know John Drake. John Drake's a legend.
John Drake?
Oh,
Who's
yeah, John Drake, because he's a super
He's
online.
Legend.
He's on Twitter.
So how young can you be to run for governor of California?
18.
Really? So, okay.
You could have run.
Did anybody write me in? I'm not seeing my name here. That one person who said they wrote in my name. I'm not seeing me
They're just
here.
spreading misinformation on stream. That'd be sick.
Thigh Hugans got more votes than me, guys.
You can't
What are we doing? What are we doing? Where's my EPO community at?
I don't think you can write people in.
I can at least beat Stacey Smith. There were write-ins. There was a write-in space. You're letting me down, guys. My California subscribers. You wrote me in. For some reason, I don't believe you.
All right, guys. I'm going to head out.
All right, you're good. Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Thank you for
Appreciate
having me, Kyle.
Of course, of course.
Have a wonderful evening.
Everybody go subscribe to Unbiased Election Predictions. Right this instant.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Really appreciate it. Bye.
Of course, of course.
So here we are, down here, now you come back to question one today in 2021, it's all good. For all of those congressional races, we're getting county results right now. We don't have congressional CD results, we'll get those in the days ahead as you break down things more granular.
Some of these comments, guys.
Right down here, as you come down to Orange County is a place where the Republican Party keeps fighting back and forth, but it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming, 58%.
John also was
58%,
pissed.
and you get into the 70s when you come into Los Angeles County. So it's south of Los Angeles, in Orange County, on your way down to San Diego, is where you still have a bit of a tug of war when you look at the congressional level as you come down in here. But if you, it's just when state.
If anybody has some substantial, nuanced comments, feel free to ask them. I welcome those over these spammed ones. We are coming on to about an hour of being live. It's essentially been called. We probably won't know the margin for at least a few days. So anything that substantial that we can sort of take away from this entire recall process is still a few days away.
So let me ask you, because the Republican Party in California has been struggling.
If Newsom wins in a landslide, do you think it was the abortion issue? Are you referring to the Texas abortion law? Or what abortion issue? I'm not sure what kind of, I don't think that's going to be a top issue in California. I doubt it was.
Also, Larry Elder, though he is pro-life, is even more anti-government than he is pro-life. So I don't, if he were to have won, a woman's right to an abortion wouldn't have necessarily been protected, but it definitely would not have been attacked. And abortion was really not mentioned on the trail. So
yeah, it was definitely not an issue of this campaign. The issue of this campaign was COVID, almost entirely.
Does he take something out of his tape to say, maybe I'm going to go my way tonight, but does he think he can entertain it right then? That'll be a question for tomorrow. Let's first finish the vote out tonight.
All right, John, thanks so much. We can now make
CNN is making a call.
CNN projects that California's Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, defeats.
There it is, folks.
Yes.
There it is.
Celebrate good times.
Turning back opposition that gained traction earlier in the pandemic, dodging what would have been a serious blow to his party and his career in one of the nation's biggest and bluest states. Again, CNN projects that Democrat Gavin Newsom, the incumbent governor, defeats the recall and will remain governor of California. Dana Bash,
Well, folks, again, unsurprising. The margin is what's going to matter. This election was not stolen.
What the governor's aides are saying that they.
There's no evidence of voter fraud.
Is make this not a referendum on him, but a referendum on what would happen if he's not there. What would happen if a Trump Republican took over? What would happen?
Dana Bash is hitting it right on the money. For Democrats, it was about what would happen if Larry Elder became governor of California. $0 minimum wage. What else was he running on? Things that are not popular among California Democrats, that's for sure. And an electorate that is almost 20%, what? It's right, it's 20% plus Democratic.
Mask mandates, not allowing them, or even not even pushing vaccines.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Good night for Democrats. They ran a Democratic playbook in a Democratic state and won. Still some warning signs, I think, for Democrats. There is so much.
What will the effects of the recall be in the 2022 governor election in California? If it's anything like what it was like in Wisconsin with Scott Walker, it'll help Newsom. That said, if it does hurt him, it probably won't hurt him enough to make him be in danger in 2022. I think a lot of Democrats view this as a giant waste of money, a process that needs to be reformed. And
What is their message about their party and their record of accomplishments?
And Casey, let me ask you, I've seen it said in the last week by Democratic aides, and I wonder if you agree.
No word yet by Larry Elder or Gavin Newsom.
Was Larry Elder
Sorry?
shooting?
No word from either of them.
No word from either.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I've had Democrats and Republicans say that to me in the course of the last day. I mean, some of the,
What are the current margins in LA? Let me pull that up for you.
They said, Larry Elder.
Los Angeles County, it is 76% no on the recall, 24% yes on the recall. As for the replacement candidates, Larry Elder leads as expected. I'm still pretty shocked about Kevin Faulconer receiving roughly the same amount of vote statewide as he did in San Diego. I would have expected that to be much higher, given that he is a two-term mayor of San Diego or former mayor of San Diego.
That there is a way to activate that instinct, because of course sometimes when elections, your voters sit back, they say everything's fine, nothing to worry about, I don't need to get engaged, I don't need to get to the polls. That didn't happen here.
And Dana, some of the policy positions that were part of Larry Elder's decades-long time in radio, in talk radio, being provocative, which is the job of somebody in talk radio, but not necessarily appealing to voters, especially not in California, opposing a minimum wage, opposing maternity leave.
I think you were trying to explain the recall process to somebody, and I will be happy to do so as well. Essentially, petitioners reached 1.5 million signatures, which was the requirement needed to trigger a recall election in California. And as that happened on this ballot, we had two questions, or California residents had two questions. The first question was yes or no on recalling Governor Gavin Newsom. And if that question, or if in a majority of the electorate, 50+1% of voters voted yes to remove Newsom, then the second question, in which there were, I think, a list of over 40 candidates, somewhere around 45 to 50 candidates, that second question featured all of those candidates, and whoever received a plurality of those votes would become governor of California on October 22nd. They did not need a majority on that second question. Hence why, as you see right here, Larry Elder is receiving 40.74% of the vote. If this vote was below 50% and the yes vote was above 50% and Governor Gavin Newsom was recalled from office, Larry Elder would become governor even with 41% of the vote. He could have received 15% of the vote and he still would have become governor if he received the most out of all of these candidates. That is the difference between a plurality and a majority.
Well, and let's pick up on your point about the Republicans.
This question by John Barlich: did Newsom win bigger than his 2018 margin? We won't know yet for sure. The numbers that are coming in right now are almost entirely mail-in and early voting data, which heavily skews Democratic. Hence why this margin is even much, much higher than the polls were anticipating. It's more than likely, almost certain to narrow. We don't know how much yet. Newsom won with, I think, 62% of the vote in 2018. Maybe it was 61%. Hence why I was saying beforehand, the expectation was that Newsom, or the no on recall, so in favor of Newsom, would receive anywhere from 55 to 60% of the vote. Anything above 60% would be good news for him. Anything below 55% would be bad news for him. So we'll see what happens in the coming days once all of the votes get tallied, because the votes that are still out there are likely to lean very Republican, or not Republican necessarily, but in favor of the recall.
That's going to be the big question. How Putin is Trump and Trumpism in 2022?
Solano County on New York Times is showing 69% remove, but 31% keep. In 2020, it was Biden plus 30%. Is that an error? Solano County, where is Solano County? That's up here, right? Yeah.
All right, Anderson.
No, it's saying 70% no on the recall. I think you might have read it wrong, but no worries. At least on mine, it says 70% no on the recall. Here on Decision Desk as well, it says 70% no.
I do caution that this is a blowout, and those numbers probably shrink. We know from last year's all vote by mail election.
I think if a governor gets recalled, it would make more sense for the lieutenant governor to take over instead of having an election. That's an interesting point. I think. What do y'all think? Should the lieutenant governor take over if the candidate is recalled, and we should just remove the second question entirely?
Yeah, we have that in like every other state, basically. Not every other, but like most other states.
It would essentially work as if like the governor resigned and the lieutenant governor took over, similar to what happened in New York. Yeah, except we don't have recalls of the president. You know, it's like. I think it's an interesting point. It might work more effectively and it might be more democratic than the system we have now, because if 1.5 million people can just trigger a recall election in a state that has 22 million registered voters. I don't know how democratic that is. I don't know whether that is a waste of resources or not. And it might be better to trigger a recall election. If you have a population that is well and truly in disapproval of the governor,
Just raise the standards so that it becomes like that. You know?
Yeah.
I feel like 3 million people are 1.5 out of 22 is enough.
I think it would be interesting, like hypothetically, what would happen if that was the case. If the electorate knew that the lieutenant governor would replace Newsom if he was removed from office, would things be closer, and would Democratic voters be more likely to vote yes on the recall, knowing that a Democratic lieutenant governor would replace him?
Yeah, that's interesting, because it's like, is it just anger at like Newsom because it's like he's Gavin Newsom, or is it anger at, he's Gavin Newsom because he's a Democratic governor from a very Democratic state, and he's a Democrat,
Let's say Gavin Newsom became the face of mask mandates and COVID restrictions.
Yeah. And I mean, if it's Democrats who don't view Newsom favorably, but also don't want Larry Elder as their governor, I think there's a chance that was a large part of the electorate that essentially just settled for Newsom, similar to a large part of the electorate settling for Biden in November. I mean, that's why Newsom making it this election, Newsom versus Elder, worked so well in his favor. If it was Newsom versus no Newsom, things probably would have ended up worse for him.
I think, in a very difficult position to hold the House.
Do I think tonight's win is another signal of a not so amazing midterm for Republicans? I don't know if we can say that with any conviction right now. I think California is a heavily blue state, and we've seen this time and time again, and this is ultimately what happened tonight. It's like people like to look at these specific races, these specific congressional races in non-election years, and try to say that it's indicative of what's to come in 2022. And I've never been a big believer in that sort of ideology, because we are over a year away from the 2022 midterms. We need to keep that in perspective. What will be an issue in November of 2022 is going to be much different than what's an issue right now. For all we know, the pandemic could rage on further. For all we know, the pandemic could be completely in hindsight by then. Yeah. And who knows what kind of social justice issues will arise by next year's midterms, where Biden's popularity will be at. I think all of those things are more likely to tell us what we need to know about those midterms than this is.
And also just like I guess the only thing you could kind of extract is like the confidence of, you know, certain Republican voters in like election processes and whether that makes them want to vote or not. Because if they like, you know, if it's straight up, I don't want to show up, that has implications.
Right.
And I think one of the biggest issues for the Republican Party right now is the fact that they are incapable of thinking when they are voting in a primary of what someone who doesn't think exactly like them is going to look for in a candidate. That happened with Trump in 2020, 2016 too, though that was, you know, that happened. But then with Larry Elder, the fact that Republicans in California were so sure that he was going to be able to overtake Gavin Newsom just because they agree with him so vehemently could prove to be a very big issue for Republicans, as primary campaigns are going to start popping up in the next, in the next year and a half, and you're going to be seeing candidates who they're going to be running for the primaries, not for the general. So that'll start popping up, and I think that's going to be a really interesting development.
Yeah. And on the note of future elections, what effect do you think this will have on the New Jersey and Virginia governor races? I don't think it will have much of an effect because, again, recall elections are very different than actual election campaigns. And having in Virginia's case, you don't have an incumbent, but in general, recall processes are so rare and so unique that I don't think we can really compare the two. Do I think the Virginia gubernatorial election will be a litmus test for 2022? I think there will be more that we can take of substance from the Virginia gubernatorial election than we can from this one. For a lot of reasons. But, you know, we'll see how that plays out, and we'll make that kind of judgment by then.
Newsom married the inside work with the outside work.
Do I think that Governor Newsom has some significant advantages for re-election in 2022 after his victory from the Republicans' unsuccessful recall? Absolutely. I've been making this point kind of throughout the night, but I'll say it again. In 2012, Scott Walker's recall, I could be completely wrong on that year, but I know that Scott Walker in Wisconsin, there was a recall attempt against him and he cruised to re-election because it was unsuccessful. I imagine that that's likely to occur again because, like, putting aside the fact that in 2022 it will be an even more Democratic electorate and there will be less anti-Newsom sentiment, I presume, by then. Putting all of that aside, I think there will be a lot of questions asked over the next year up until that midterm over whether the reform process is actually democratic and whether that's something that California wants to have going forward. And I think that's only going to benefit Newsom.
As we've seen in the past few months too, anti-Newsom fervor, it really ebbs and flows with COVID cases and COVID restrictions. So once that's behind us, you'll start seeing more, I guess, true sentiments and true numbers and true polling.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ben Harley. Trying to, just moving so fast, it's like, the margins are tightening as expected. It's now 61% to 39%. I expect it to tighten even more as more election day votes come in. And then the mail-in votes from the last day or two before the election that are still allowed to be counted as long as they were postmarked before the election and counted at least 5 days after the election. I could be wrong, but I think that's right. I think those will probably skew more Democratic, not as much as the early vote and the mail-in vote that we've already seen come in so far tonight. But I think we'll probably see the race tighten and then widen out a little bit more.
No, it's not the only thing.
Newsom is speaking.
Do
you want to turn it up?
What we said yes to as a state. We said yes to science. We said yes to vaccines. We said yes to ending this pandemic. We said yes to people's right to vote without fear of fake fraud or voter suppression. We said yes to women's fundamental constitutional right to decide for herself what she does with her body.
more
faith in the
speech.
future.
Do you want to pass me the speaker?
We said yes to diversity. We said yes to inclusion.
Thank you.
We said yes to pluralism. We said yes to all those things that we hold dear as Californians, and I would argue as Americans: economic justice, social justice, racial justice, environmental justice, our values where California's made so much progress. All of those things were on the ballot this evening. And so I'm humbled and grateful to the millions and millions of Californians that exercised their fundamental right to vote and express themselves so overwhelmingly by rejecting the division, by rejecting the cynicism, by rejecting so much of the negativity that's defined our politics in this country over the course of so many years. I just think of our kids watching all of this. Nightly news, day in and day out. And I just wonder, I've got 4 young kids. Oldest about to turn 12 this weekend. And what they're growing up to. You know, in a world where we're so divided, these kids increasingly fearful, isolated, disconnected. And we're teaching them that. And it doesn't have to be that way. I think we owe our kids a deeper sense of respect, and all of us as adult responsibility to disregard this false separateness. We're so much more in common as a state and a nation than we give ourselves credit for. I've been all over the state of California over the last many years, but notably the last 9 months. Conservative parts of the state, progressive parts of the state, folks that I know were going to vote no, and folks that I knew were going to vote yes on this recall, and turned out to do just that. But one thing that's universal, everybody wants to be respected.
Okay, that's enough of that.
Everyone wants to feel some.
Going to ask one more time before I give up. How many recall signatures, or how many signatures do you think should be required for a recall? That's a good question. I think that'll come down to, ideally, that would be dependent on how many registered voters we have in California. Ideally, it would be a certain percentage of that. And you can debate what percentage that should be. I think it should be higher than it is right now. That's for sure. I don't think 1.5 million people should decide should be able to trigger a recall election in a state that has 22 million registered voters. I think you could argue that maybe some number closer to maybe a third of the electorate, maybe a little bit more than that. I think 50% would probably be too high. But I mean, that's an interesting question and something that I think is going to be talked about a lot going forward.
I think it's something you could easily do some political science research on to
Yeah.
come up with a figure that's like appropriate for speaking for enough people.
What's happening
Yep.
with assault on fundamental rights, constitutional.
You are very surprised by the Orange County margin right now, as I thought it would vote to remove Newsom. Orange County,
in our nation's history.
what do we have
But
there?
I'm reminded.
We have
of,
58% to
decades ago,
So much.
no on the recall. What was it in 2020?
It's
It
probably
was tight. 'Cause
just
it was-
tight.
Right.
Yeah.
In 2018, I mean, they got Harley Ruda. In
Right.
2020, they lost him by, I think,
To win
less than a
fleeting
percentage point.
victories that other people.
But I don't think they're in person.
He went on to say,
Because
we must
57%,
all try
that
and
would
work together.
kind of
So
track.
in that
You know,
spirit
because the in person,
of recognizing
So obviously
and
we're leaning
reconciling
more
this moment
yes, on the recall.
and trying to understand.
I think this is a very good point. For people who don't think of recall elections as being fundamentally different from regular elections, a candidate like Elder would never be this competitive in an actual election in California. I think you're right. I think you're very right. All the circumstances surrounding this election were anti-Newsom compared to what you would see in a regular midterm election. That's for sure.
Thank you for rejecting this recall. Good night, everybody.
And Newsom's done.
Democratic Governor
Back to
Gavin
work.
Newsom speaking there in Sacramento after.
I think you can tell he's definitely relieved. I don't think he's surprised. I think he was probably surprised once the polls showed the race was close, but he woke up and he took care of business as expected.
But beyond that, this was a message. The speech he just gave seemed a national speech. It was not just about California. It was not just about what happened today.
Shoot, I missed
it
a
was
few.
about-
Okay.
and honestly-
Still radio silence.
it sounded almost like a
Thank you so much for the super chat, Zubin Luthra. Is Newsom going to give a victory speech? He just gave a victory speech. Sorry, I was late on this. Why is there a north-south divide in Cali? There isn't necessarily a north-south divide in California. At least not one that's noticeable. That's for sure. I mean, I don't know if you're basing this off the idea of like New California, like that whole like splitting the state up into different sections, but that's not a thing. Unless you're referring to Northern California, this kind of area,
No
but
one lives there.
that just has to do with the fact that it's very rural.
Southern-
Whereas most of the rest of the state, especially along the coast, is very urban. A lot more people live in these areas and more urban areas. Urban areas tend to vote more Democratic, and in this case, would vote to keep Newsom in office, whereas rural areas, the opposite.
His email, and he is doing
Trees don't vote.
everything.
If Elder won despite having less votes than no votes, would that be technically unconstitutional, and would Democrats have challenged in courts? Okay, if Elder won despite having less votes than no votes, would that be so do you mean just if Elder won despite having less votes to his name than no votes on the
So basically, if the recall, so if it was like 51-49 yes on the recall, but like Elder in the second question got like 35% and he got the most, and he had like, so he would have less votes than no on the recall because it was 51-49. It's like 49% of all versus
right.
35% of all.
I don't think you can declare that unconstitutional if that is how the California law says this election is to be held.
And it's like a state thing, so it's not.
In some ways, I think they've already figured that out.
The Constitution, the Constitution grants states specifically the right to run their own elections.
I think we knew going into
And that's actually one of the biggest factors in why you have some moderate Republicans like Murkowski, Collins, Romney, who were against the voting rights package, HR 1, so Senate Bill 1. And that's because of federal overreach, not because they necessarily don't believe in election integrity, but because of that federal overreach that I just mentioned.
All three of us are from California,
They feel pretty good about
so
tonight,
we're not gonna
because the
STF you.
Republicans, again, are giving them so much to work with.
Thank
And
you.
in fact, it was just a few days ago that Larry Elder said that Joe
Will
Biden-
Trump run in 2024? This is off topic, but I believe he will.
I don't know. I think he needs to say he's going to run to raise money for as long as possible.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
mean, his name in the paper, but
Yeah.
there's a good chance he does.
Gavin Newsom, tell us what you're picking up in the.
35% of eligible voters should be the amount required for a recall. I think that's a good number. It's a lot, but it's better than whatever it is now. That's for sure. The problem with basing it off of registered voters is that states suck at clearing the voter rolls. That's a good point. You could base it off of how many voters voted in the previous election. That would almost be, or the previous general election. That could be, or previous gubernatorial election would probably be more relevant. That would maybe be a better system. Good question, though, or good point.
I will also say there are some to-do items. Even with this huge Newsom victory, there are some to-do items here for the Democratic Party, especially in less blue places. You see real concern among voters when it comes to the economy and to the cost of living in your community. Inflation, as Casey was just saying, that's real. And
We're not missing
every
anything.
politician on the ballot in 2022 is going to need to deal with that, acknowledge that, and make
Yeah,
sure
we'll
they
get it
don't
one sec.
ignore it. That's one. And the other thing I would just note, we see some of the demographic trends, Jake, that we saw in 2020 still very much at play. In
Do
this
you think
Trump
Elder is going
Trump
to
era, which is
concede?
that
I would hope so.
white college educated
If the numbers stay where they are right now, I would hope so that he does so in the coming days. I understand if he wants to wait until all of the vote is counted. That's not a problem for me. What would be a problem is if he shouts voter fraud after all of the votes are counted and he's lost by 15 points or more. I would take issue with that.
I think the days of traditional concessions by Republicans are very much
Yeah.
over for now.
Or at least, you know, not as much of a sure bet as it used to be.
By 22 points.
That would be putting it very.
There's definitely a cultural divide between North and South, although it's probably not noticeable to non-Californians. As two Northern Californians and one Southern Californian, I don't think there's as much of a cultural divide as a lot of people try to say there is. I mean, like there are things that NorCal, I mean, there are Northern California norms that are different from SoCal norms, but it's not like we feel like we're entirely different states. It's not like we're divided. I go into that.
Also, politically, there's not much of a divide at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Politically, definitely not.
Anderson, talking to a variety of Democrats as we have been.
But like north of NorCal, you know, those red areas up there we were talking about before, there definitely is a cultural divide.
Absolutely.
But you know, just given the natural like rural urban divide that's everywhere else in the country,
Right.
it's just, you know, again, so many more people live in the urban areas than the rural areas.
Right. He said he wouldn't accept the results, so I'm assuming no. Where did you read that? I mean, like, I don't not believe you, but I would want to know where it was.
questioned on whether or not he concede.
Okay.
And he didn't say yes or no. He said, well, I think what we should all be doing right now is making sure that our elections are secure.
Right.
Democrat or Republican. He dodged the question multiple times.
And his website said like yesterday before, you know, even the votes were counted, that there had been like evidence of fraud because, you know, like that one political science rule was violated that like doesn't prove anything.
Right.
This is going to essentially offer a roadmap.
Do I think that this could affect potential progressive challengers to Newsom in 2022 and the Senate in 2024?
On the mandates for mask wearing and for.
I don't think anybody from the progressive wing of the party is likely to challenge Newsom. I think he's, I mean,
there's also Senate in 2022.
right, right. With that's Padilla's seat, right? Padilla's seat.
Yeah.
It's more of a warning sign for them.
Once Feinstein's seat rolls around in 2024, that'll be interesting because there's basically a 0% chance that she runs again. And who runs for that seat? That'll be an interesting race, for sure. But I don't think this recall is going to impact what happens in 2024.
The message is Trumpism is not the future if you want to win.
The Senate and governor elections are unfair because of the nonpartisan blanket primary results, which make it harder for the Republicans because of how democratic the state is. I don't think this is true. I think what's fair is to have whoever receives the most votes win. I don't think that a Republican should necessarily be awarded a 1v1 versus a Democrat just because they're a Republican. I think whoever receives the most votes in that blanket primary should go on to the ballot in November, especially because of how democratic the state is. I think your argument should actually be used in favor of the blanket primary. Because of how democratic the state is, it is fair that because more Democratic voters vote and vote for Democratic candidates, it makes more sense for there to be a blanket primary and give more Democrats an opportunity to win.
He's more likely, in fact, to run again for vengeance now than he was even at the beginning of the summer. And you look at somebody like Mitch McConnell, who is fighting for a majority, and Donald Trump is endorsing people that Mitch McConnell doesn't want.
Newsom will run for re-election, and when Feinstein retires, will most likely run for the Senate. It's interesting because, I mean, if he runs for re-election in 2022, he won't be up again until 2026, and that Senate election will be in 2024.
Contributes to fumbling the midterm.
I'm not sure whether he'll be like Jerry Brown in that he promises to finish the rest of his term before he actually runs for anything else, or if he's ambitious enough to take on something like the Senate or potentially the presidency before his term ends.
I don't see any space for Trump to run for the presidency.
Yeah.
At this moment.
Yeah.
But of course, it hasn't gone away. But nights like tonight hopefully continue to degrade it
Suspect of what?
for the sake of the country.
I'm not sure what you
As a
mean.
Republican,
Do you think the margin there?
hopefully it degrades it so we can get back to opportunities to advance forward and win and broaden our.
Do you think Biden, if he runs for the second term, will anybody who runs in 2024 will carry the state of California? Any Democrat, that is.
You can't win unless you get
I think you're underestimating just how blue the state of California is. I think this should prove it again.
That is the fundamental.
In an election where everything was favoring Republicans, Democrats still outperformed.
This was more a warning sign for Republicans.
Whether Biden runs again is a whole different question than whether any Democrat or him will carry the state of California.
And it's a redistricting year in which Republicans are going to benefit from redistricting. Democrats really start behind in the race for the House. And so much is reliant on what happens, what course this virus takes, what forced the.
Little off topic, but are y'all following the Canadian election this Sunday? I am not. I've seen some polls about it, and I'm interested to see the results, but I'm not all that engaged in it. I don't necessarily care too much about Canadian politics, to be honest.
You got to play offense, and Trump gives them the opportunity to play offense.
I think the one thing to say is, I'm proud of Gavin Newsom. Like this is his night. He had a tough hand. He was going down. He was in the toilet starting to swirl.
Do I think it was a waste of California taxpayers' money to hold a recall? I think most people would, especially on the more Democratic liberal side of politics in California, would say so. I think this idea of it being a waste of taxpayers' money, if anything, will just spark more debate about whether this entire process is democratic or not. And I think that's a good thing. At least I would hope there's a lot of debate about whether it is a waste and whether we want this kind of process to be possible in the future.
They also ran a great campaign, and I admire the campaign they ran. It was smart. As I said, they grabbed the definition of the race. They define what.
Do you think that the recall election should be abolished? If not, why? I mean, we've talked about this. I don't know if it should necessarily be abolished. I think it should be reformed. The way that it is now, I am not in favor of. So we'll see.
When they said just vote no. Let's get rid of the rest of the Democrats. So let's make this a simple.
So let's get this straight. They're trying to say the Democrats are now more popular than 2020 election results. Who is they? Are you referring to the people that are counting the ballots because they haven't finished counting ballots? And it is more than likely going to be a smaller margin than in 2020. If that is what you are looking for to satisfy your belief that this election is somehow rigged, it is likely to narrow as the election day vote comes in. That's something that if you were reading anything about this recall, you would have known.
Voters today, according to this exit poll, either said that the measures that Newsom has implemented were about right or not strict enough.
Right.
Well, those not strict enough people did not vote for recall.
So they could nationalize the election.
Right.
Newsom spent 8 times more on this election than Elder. I guess money speaks. The rest doesn't matter. I don't know if the rest doesn't matter, but money does talk. Money does certainly talk, especially in politics. You can make arguments about whether that's what should be the case or not. But it does have a significant impact. All right, I think I'm going to start to wrap this up pretty soon. If anybody has any questions, pressing questions that you're dying to ask, if Elder won and Feinstein died during his term, would Elder have to pick a Democrat and replace her? No. Yeah. I don't know if you heard that, but Ben said that he promised a Republican. He would not have to choose a Democrat to replace her. I don't think that Feinstein is going to run again in 2024, but I assume you're talking about before 2024. Chance that Feinstein resigns now that Gavin has won tonight because of her age and Democrats afraid of her dying in the Senate and giving the majority to Republicans. I don't know.
There's no longer the risk of.
Yeah, I don't think she necessarily needs to resign. I don't think Newsom's going to lose in 2022 either. So
there have been conversations happening, to put it nicely, about her general capacity to continue as a senator representing California.
Also notably, last week's former Senator Barbara Boxer, who served alongside Feinstein for decades, said that if she were to speak to Feinstein personally and privately, that she would recommend that she retire.
Yeah.
So that is kind of the biggest voice for retirement thus far.
Yeah. We are closing in on an hour and a half of being live. So
Do you use the when referring to freeways like the 405? I'm from SoCal, so it is the 405. It's the 101.
No,
I don't know what it is to you guys.
We have 680, we have 580, we have 880, we have
101.
101.
It's not the 101.
We have 5.
I guess that might be a cultural divide. I don't know if that's something we can get over, to be honest.
And we're right. No,
we might
we're
have to
right.
secede. We might have to say bye to LA, cut them off.
Analytical software that connects assets and people
Okay, folks, if you guys have any pressing questions that you really want answered, I would encourage you to super chat, but of course you don't have to. But I only have about a minute left on here before I have to go. If I was in California, I'd be on here a lot longer, but I'm not. That is the beauty of the time zones. Beauty, I don't know why I use that word. Thoughts on Brexit? Why would I offer my opinion on Brexit?
Companies to fall behind. These overreaching bills will
Why is our house so soft?
at a time when we're engaged in high-stakes competition.
Ban it, ban it, ban it.
For someone else. We need to protect our competitive edge.
I disagree with the premise of the
Fall is
question.
here, and so are new opportunities to enjoy this life we love. That's why we're stocked and making it easy for you to get everything you need, so you can care for the ones that count on you. Prepare for what's around the corner. Get more out of the shorter days and add warmth to the cooler nights. In over 2,000 stores, we're here to help you enjoy the new season, stocked and ready for fall. Plus the services that make shopping for it easier. Tractor Supply, everything for life out here.
I don't think you can't compare California and Texas politics. California is much more of a Democratic stronghold than Texas is a Republican stronghold. All you have to do to come to that conclusion is look at the 2020 election results. California was decided by, I think, almost 30 points. Texas was decided by about 5 points. And one is trending in the Democratic direction, and one is trending also in the Democratic direction. Would it be a wise thing for Democrats to focus on flipping Texas? I mean, they have focused on flipping Texas for a while. I think, if anything, the 2020 election showed that Texas becoming blue is going to be a lot more work for the Democratic Party than they initially expected. I think they kind of came into the election expecting it to be almost a toss-up because of rapidly changing demographics and the Latino vote. But at some point, they're going to hit a population wall where you just simply cannot find more voters than you already do. And whether they've already hit that or not is going to be interesting. We'll see in 2024.
Blue Texas is always such a liberal pipe dream.
It is.
Every year, every presidential election year, there's always discussion of Texas turning blue. This year, it kind of looked the closest with Vice President Harris. Actually, just 5 days before the election, visiting Texas, and that was kind of at the not request, but at the advice of former Congressman Beto O'Rourke. But then you wake up and it's still red. So I think it's definitely much more worthwhile for Democrats to be looking at other states that are not Texas, especially looking at how gerrymandered it is.
Right.
But yeah.
Will the California recall results be announced tonight, or question mark? I assume you're referring to the final results, because most news networks have already called the race for Newsom, and it is looking like he is more than likely, almost certain to remain in office. The final results probably won't be certified for at least a few days, given that the results that we've received tonight are mostly early vote and mail-in voting. And then, of course, we've had election day vote trickle in as they have tabulated that throughout the night, and they will continue to do so into the early morning. But the final batch of votes, or the third batch of votes, if you're going to separate it into sort of three different groups, is the mail-in votes that were sent either in the last few days or today and postmarked before the polls closed at 8 p.m. Pacific time, but are allowed to be counted at least, I think, 5 days after the election. So we won't know the final certified results until those votes are tabulated. Okay. Newsom might lose to a Democrat in 2022 because of this recall. I don't think that is something that we can reasonably infer from these election results, or just from a political analysis standpoint. I don't think that that's something we can even just suggest. That there's no real precedent for that. All right, folks, I think that's it, unless I missed any super chats. I don't think I did. Thank you all so much for joining me. It's been an hour and a half. It's been an entertaining hour and a half. Thank you all so very much for your questions. No thank you to the people who were saying mean stuff, because
we're not affected, all right?
Yeah, like
never.
But thank you all so very much, and we will see you again soon. For those of you asking if I'm going to start using my voice again for videos, I plan to. It's just I am very busy these days, and we'll see what happens. But I appreciate all your support. I've been noticing it on the videos, so thank you all very much.
Should he vlog is the real question.
That's another question that I've been meaning to ask. Should I vlog my daily goings in DC? Let me know. We'll see. I don't know if I have the personality for that, but yeah. Okay. Thank you all so very much. Again, I've said that a lot, but enjoy the rest of your night. Sleep well. If you are past your bedtime, celebrate or be sad, however you feel about these election results. And I will see you guys next time whenever we another big election comes around. So yeah, goodbye, everybody. Signing off. Thank you, and God bless our troops.